Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here. In this video, we'll be going over how to set up a 1-bar build for the Elder Scrolls Online, as well as the benefits and limitations to this playstyle. I've actually uploaded several 1-bar builds to my channel this year, so I'll have plenty of gameplay in the background for reference. And make sure you stick around because I'll be explaining several strong 1-bar builds at the end of this video, including which classes and skills are best. So let's jump right into it. First, if you're not sure what we're talking about here, 1-bar builds in ESO are extremely simple and straightforward. Basically, it just means that you put all of your best abilities on your main skill bar so that you don't need to bar swap to your backup weapon to cast any other abilities. This means you don't need any complicated rotations in order to manage your skills and buffs, and generally playing the character just becomes much easier to manage. Now, I think what a lot of people don't understand is why a player would want to limit themselves in this way. I mean, why would you basically cut down your active skills in the game by 50%? At first, I didn't get it either, honestly, but over time, I've realized that I do like 1-bar builds for certain situations. So the first thing to realize here is that the action combat of ESO is actually pretty different than the usual combat style of an Elder Scrolls game. So people that are coming into ESO as new players, but maybe are more familiar with other Elder Scrolls games, let's say Skyrim, those players aren't used to having so many skills active and available at once. I'd say that many players are actually much more accustomed to just having a few active spells and weapon attacks, just like in Skyrim. Players that came to ESO from Skyrim specifically, maybe they played that game for so long, and the idea of having 2 full skill bars of abilities and having to switch in between them and integrate those abilities into damage rotations, that's probably very confusing at first. Unless you dedicate a lot of time to practicing, reading guides, or watching videos at YouTube, I know that's how it was for me at first, for sure. So some players certainly struggle with the bar swap mechanic in ESO just from not having experienced anything like it before. Some players don't even know that the mechanics are there, and some players do know it's there, but they just don't like it and they don't want to use it. Not only that, you also have some players who might have some physical limitations which make bar swapping difficult or even impossible for them. So for those players, it's not even an option or a preference. It's just that they can't play ESO in that way and they need a simpler alternative. And that's where the 1-bar setup has really started gaining popularity, I think. For me, one of the great things about Elder Scrolls Online is that there's so many different play styles of players and also different activities to support them in the game. I mean, think about it. Yeah, we do have endgame activities like PvP and PvE raids where every action matters and you do need to constantly be bar swapping and the rotation is important because that's what's required of the content to be successful. Many players do want that kind of challenging experience and they enjoy completing it, which is great. But we also have other activities like, let's say, crafting, questing, soloing overland content, soloing in dungeons, farming for item sets. These activities have just as many players interested in completing that style of content too. Now, some of those playstyles obviously are not combat related, so they don't really apply to this discussion. But those that do, let's say, soloing overland content or soloing dungeons, those activities don't actually require 2 full skill bars or complicated skill rotations to complete them in most cases. More often than not, you can just go with a strong 1-bar build that uses just a few key skills and doesn't require bar swapping skill bars at all. And what's great is that players that don't want to learn those complicated rotations or just can't for whatever reason, they can still play ESO just like anybody else. Can they do everything in the game well? No, they definitely, they won't be able to complete the higher end dungeons and trials because, like we said, that content requires the bar swapping, the complex rotation based gameplay in order to be successful. But there's still plenty of other content for them to do in ESO. You can basically do any of the overland and DLC quest lines. You can explore and complete delves, public dungeons. You can even solo some group content like world bosses and group dungeons on normal mode. And since there technically is no 1-player story mode for any of the group dungeon quests, giving players the ability to solo that content when they are not comfortable playing in a group is actually really good. It might unlock new areas for that player that they couldn't have accessed before, which might give them more enjoyment of the game, which is one of the reasons why this channel exists. So hopefully that explains why 1-bar builds exist and how they can be used. I also created a 1-bar build series here on HTM because I wanted to give more players more options to complete the content that they wanted to do, even if they weren't able to play a typical DPS or group build using more complicated setups. So if that's something that interests you or someone you know, I'll have links for those builds in the description below. I also have a dedicated area of my website for ESO 1-bar builds, which I'll have linked in the description as well. So now that we have the basics down, let's talk about how to build for one skill bar. So creating a 1-bar setup in ESO is actually really simple if you know what to build for. Obviously, we have 5 skill slots for normal abilities and 1 skill slot for an ultimate. In terms of those 5 normal abilities, I usually recommend one source of healing, either a strong heal over time or a burst heal ability. For example, sorcerers have crit surge. This gives them healing about every 1 second and also buffs their weapon and spell damage by 20%. Necromancers have spirit guardian, which gives them healing and damage reduction. The next skill I would recommend is a defensive skill. This is usually a class armor ability. For example, Wardens have Ice Fortress, which gives them major resolve and minor protection, or Templars have Rune Focus, which gives them major resolve plus 50% armor and either stamina or magicka recovery based on the morph choice. For the third ability, this would be your spammable damage skill, which could come from either a class skill line or a weapon skill line. For example, Templars have Sweeps or Jabs, Nightblades have Swallow Soul or Surprise Attack. Weapon skills like Dizzying Swing, Force Pulse, Bloodthirst, those will work just as well in some cases, depending on the build. Now, the fourth ability would just be some sort of supporting damage skill, like a damage over time. Often this can be a weapon ability, like Wall of Elements from the Destruction Staff skill line, or Volley from the Bow skill line. These are really important because they consistently proc your enchant, which can provide either extra weapon and spell damage, it could give you extra sustain, or even extra damage shielding depending on the glyph that you choose. For your fifth and final normal skill, this would just be another buff of your choice. This could be a guild skill, for example. Stamina builds can use Camouflage Hunter to increase their critical damage passively by 10% and get Minor Berserk on top of that, which is an extra free 8% damage. Magicka builds can use something here like Inner Light, which provides up to 7% bonus max magicka and 10% bonus spell crit chance. Now, I just want to point out here that literally every skill I mentioned does multiple functions in one ability, and that's pretty important when you're trying to get the most out of your skills as possible. Like we just mentioned, Camo Hunter from the Fighters Guild, you don't even have to press this skill, so it's free. It doesn't need to be maintained or recasted, which makes your build even easier. So basically, with a 1-bar build, the more free effects you can get off one skill, the better. This is another reason why I say that 1-bar builds can be nearly as effective as running 2 full skill bars if you choose the right skills. Now, in terms of the ultimate, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the build. Generally speaking, though, I do tend to pick class-based ultimates, as those are usually stronger. For example, the Colossus ultimate from the Necromancer class does just so much damage, and it gives you extra critical damage. Basically, you just want the strongest ultimate you have access to on your class, and that's it. That's the 1-bar build for any class setup. Now, I promised I would show a few build examples here, so let's start with the classic Magicka Templar 1-bar setup. There are lots of options for building this, but here's what I prefer. For sets, 5 Light of Cyrodiil, 5 Overwhelming Surge, and the Mother Seanet monster set. For our heal, we have Puncturing Sweeps, armor ability that's going to be channeled focus. For the spammable Puncturing Sweeps, again, it actually functions for both healing and damage. For our dot support ability, Blockade of Storms. For our supporting buff, Elemental Drain. And then since Sweeps is doing double duty on this, we do have an extra slot here. So another great extra dot effect is going to be Vampire's Bane. For your ultimate, you can either run the Destruction Staff ultimate or the Dawn's Wrath ultimate Solar Disturbance. Very powerful setup and a lot of fun to play just with one skill bar again. Another great option for a solo 1-bar build, that's going to be the Magicka Necromancer. Necromancers have tons of great skills in general and passives, so they usually get multiple buffs from one skill. For gear sets on this build, we're using 5 Draugr Grip, 5 Mother Sorrow, and 2 pieces of Ice Heart. For our skills, we've got Spirit Guardian, that's going to count as a heal and damage reduction. For our armor ability, we've got Beckoning Armor. The spammable here is going to be Stalking Blast Bones, but also kind of sort of heavy attacks. You can kind of mix those together. For our supporting dot, we've got Elemental Blockade again, and then for the support skill, Mystic Siphon. Mystic Siphon actually is an AoE damage over time that also returns magicka. For our ultimate here, which we mentioned before, the Colossus is going to be amazing, both for the burst potential and for the extra passives that you get. So there you go, everybody. 1-bar build theory crafting with some examples. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and if you did, don't forget to crush that like button for me. If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure you are subscribed to the channel as well with notifications turned on so you don't miss anything. Also, if you'd like to support the channel further, there's links in the description to my social media, the new website, and that juicy join button. Click on that for more information on becoming a channel member. As always, I hope you're doing well, stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.